My name is Catherine Sullivan. I'm 28 years old, and I'm a lieutenant in the United States Navy. I grew up in a small coastal town in Rhode Island, where the ocean was always a part of our lives. My father, James Sullivan, owned a small boatyard that built and repaired fishing boats, a business that had been in our family for 3 generations. Our house sat high on a hill overlooking the ocean, a pale blue wooden Victorian that my great-grandfather built with his own hand. We affectionately called it the lighthouse, even though it had no light to guide ships. I grew up surrounded by the smell of fresh wood and naval paint, learning to tie knots before I even learned to tie my own shoelaces. My father said I had salt water in my veins. Maybe he was right. From a young age, I knew I wanted something more than our sleep could offer. While other girls dreamed of dresses and proms, I dreamed of uniforms and battleships. In school, I excelled in math and science, and at 17, I earned a place at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. My father cried the day I left, not out of sadness, but out of pride. He always believed I would go far, further than he ever could with his modest family business. Katie, he told me on the day of my graduation from the academy, using the nickname only he used. You are the best part of me sailing the world. After graduation, I was assigned to serve as a navigating officer on a destroyer, the USS Halsey. I spent the next 3 years sailing across oceans, learning to lead, make decisions under pressure, and be the backbone of a crew that depended on me as much as I depended on them. It was during my 3rd leave, when I returned home for 2 weeks, that I realized something was wrong. The shipyard was different, fewer employees, and my father seemed to have aged 10 years in just 1. He tried to hide it, of course. James Sullivan was one of those men who carried his burdens in silence, believing it was his duty to protect others, especially his daughter, from worldly concern. But I wasn't a girl anymore. And after 3 days of listening to him avoid my questions about the business, I decided to investigate on my own. On the 4th day of my leave, while my father slept, I went down to his basement office and began poring over the accounting books. What I found left me cold. The Sullivan shipyard was drowning in debt. There were mortgages on the property, unpaid loans, and a series of checks made out to someone named Maxwell Harrington III. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't immediately place him. The next morning, I confronted my father. At first, he tried to deflect the subject, but when he saw the determination in my eyes, the same stubbornness he always said I inherited from him, he finally relented. "I didn't want you to know, Kate," he said, running a hand through his gray hair. "I didn't want you to worry about it during your service." The story he told me was both sad and common. The small town's economy had changed. Large commercial fishing boats were replacing the small artisanal fishermen who had been the shipyard's main clientele. Larger marinas, with more resources and modern technology, were attracting the few remaining customers. And then Maxwell Harrington III emerged. Harrington was a Boston businessman who had purchased several properties in the city in recent years. He planned to transform the waterfront into a luxury resort complex, complete with yachts, marinas, expensive restaurants, and exclusive condominiums. "He came to me about a year ago," my father explained. "He offered to buy the shipyard for a sum that would barely cover my debts. When I refused, he started playing dirty." Suddenly, the Sullivan shipyard began facing problems with municipal inspection. Licenses that had previously been automatically renewed began to be questioned. Longtime customers began canceling orders. The local bank, which had always been flexible with payment terms, suddenly began demanding strict compliance with all obligations. "Last month, he came here himself," my father said, his voice trembling. "He looked around, laughed in that arrogant way of his, and said it was only a matter of time before this pile of rotten boards was his. He said he would buy everything, the shipyard, the land, and even our house." It was then that I remembered where I knew Harrington's name from. When we were teenagers, his son, Maxwell IV, attended the same school as me. He was a spoiled, arrogant boy who often mocked the townspeople, especially the children of working-class people like me. I remembered how he had once ridiculed our house, calling it a fisherman's shack decorated like a birthday cake. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked, feeling anger rise inside me. "What could you do, Katie? You have your own life, your own career. I'm just an old man trying to hold together a dying business." I looked at my father, at his hands calloused from decades of hard work at his tired but still proud eyes, and I made a decision. My leave ends in 10 days, I said. Until then, we'll figure out exactly what's going on and how we can fix it. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in the investigation. I visited the city clerk's office, spoke with former shipyard employees, and spoke with other local business owners. The pattern that emerged was clear. Harrington was systematically buying up properties in the port area using questionable tactics when necessary. But in the case of the Sullivan shipyard, he seemed to have a special, almost personal interest. 5 days after discovering I was sitting in a small coffee shop downtown when I saw Maxwell Harrington III for the first time. He walked in as if he owned the place, and maybe he did, accompanied by 2 men in suits. It wasn't hard to recognize him. He had the same smug smile as his son, the same air of superiority. I watched him discreetly as he spoke animatedly to his companions, gesturing as if he were presenting grand visions for the city's future. At one point, he mentioned old Sullivan and his wooden shed, and the 3 of them laughed as if sharing an inside joke. Something inside me flared. I stood up, smoothing my casual shirt, and walked to his desk. "Mr. Harrington?" I said, keeping my voice calm and professional as I would on the deck of the ship. "I'm Catherine Sullivan, daughter of James Sullivan. I'd like to talk to you about the shipyard." His smile faltered for a moment, but quickly recovered. "Miss Sullivan," he said, looking me up and down, "I hear you're in the Navy now. Back to help Dad keep the boat afloat?" He laughed at his own joke, and his companions followed suit. "Actually," I replied, "I came back to understand why you seem to have such a personal interest in ruining my family business." The smile was completely gone now. He gestured to his companion, who quickly got up and walked away, leaving us alone. "Look, girl," he said, leaning forward, "it's nothing personal. It's just business. Your father is sitting on a piece of land worth far more than that pathetic shipyard will ever be. I'm offering him an honorable exit before he loses it all." "An honorable way out?" I repeated. "Do you call it honorable to pressure suppliers into not selling to him, or to bribe inspectors to find non-existent problems?" Harrington laughed, but his eyes remained cold. "You have no proof of any of this. And even if you did, who would believe you against me in this city? I create jobs, pay taxes, fund campaigns. What do you do besides sail around playing sailor?" I felt my face heat up, but I kept my composure. I wouldn't let him provoke me. "Don't underestimate what a naval officer is capable of, Mr. Harrington," he said calmly, "especially when it comes to protecting what's yours." I turned to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. "Listen, Catherine," he said, his voice softer now, almost reasonable. "Your father is fighting the inevitable. That shipyard is from the last century. My project will bring prosperity to the entire town. Why don't you convince your father to accept my offer? I might even find a place for him in the new development, perhaps a small museum of local nautical history, with him as curator. That would be ... I pulled my arm back and looked him straight in the eye. "My father is a boat builder, Mr. Harrington, not a museum piece." I left the coffee shop with my heart pounding, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. I now knew who we were dealing with and that this would be a much tougher battle than I'd imagined. Back at the house, I found my father in the backyard, working on a small model boat, his usual hobby when he needed to think. I sat next to him and shared my encounter with Harrington. "He won't give up easily," my father said, sighing. "Neither do we," I replied. That night, as I reviewed all the documents I'd collected, an idea struck me. Harrington had power and money, but perhaps there was something he was overlooking. I decided I needed professional help. The next day, I used my savings to hire Sarah Martinez, a lawyer who had grown up in our town before studying law at Harvard and returning to open her own firm. I knew her from school. She was a few years older than me, but I'd always admired her intelligence and determination. "Catherine Sullivan," she smiled as I entered her office. "I heard you were back in town and wearing a rather impressive uniform now." After updating her on the situation, Sarah listened attentively, taking occasional notes. "Harrington is playing dirty," she said when I finished, "but he's not invincible. Give me a few days to investigate this further." 3 days later, Sarah called me, asking me to meet with her as soon as possible. When I arrived at her office, she was beaming. "Catherine, you're going to love this," she said, spreading documents across the table. "I've been researching the city's property records and found something interesting about the Sullivan Shipyard site. Did you know your great-grandfather received that land as a gift from the city in 1892? I shook my head, confused. Not exactly. I know he was one of the first shipbuilders in the region, but well, he didn't just receive the land. He received it with specific conditions set forth in a legal document that has never been revoked. The property was granted to the Sullivan family in perpetuity, provided it is used for shipbuilding and related maritime activities. And here's the interesting part. She pointed to a paragraph. If at any time the property is used for any other purpose, it automatically reverts to the city. I looked at her, understanding dawning. So if Harrington bought the property, double quotes, he couldn't build his luxury resort without violating the reversion clause, Sarah added, which means the city could simply repossess the land, leaving him with nothing but a worthless contract. But why would the city support Harrington if that clause exists? I asked. Sarah smiled. That's the best part. I have reason to believe the mayor and some council members aren't aware of this clause. The records I found were archived in an old section of the clerk's office, documents that have only been partially digitized. Harrington likely did his research using only the most recent digital record. A wave of hope washed over me for the first time in days. This mean we can legally detain him? Not just stop him, Sarah said, but potentially turn the tables on him. If we can prove he used improper tactics to pressure his father, we can file a lawsuit for wrongful commercial interference. And with this reversion clause as leverage, we can force him to back down. When I returned home and told my father what Sarah had discovered, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, a gleam of hope in his eyes. He said, squeezing my hand, "You've always been the stronger of us two. I learned from the best, Dad," I replied. Over the next few days, Sarah prepared our legal strategy while I gathered more evidence of Harrington's tactics. I managed to persuade 2 former suppliers to admit they had been pressured to sever ties with Sullivan Shipyard. A retired city inspector confided that he had been instructed to be especially thorough in his inspections of our yard. I had only 2 days left on my leave when Sarah suggested it was time to act. "Let's go to City Hall first," she said, "and then we'll confront Harrington directly." The City Hall meeting was scheduled for that same afternoon. Mayor Thompson, a portly man who had served 3 consecutive terms, received us in his office with obvious discomfort. "Miss Sullivan, Miss Martinez," he said, "I understand but Mr. Harrington has development plans that will benefit the entire city." Sarah smiled politely as she placed a folder on the mayor's desk. "Mr. Mayor, before we continue, I'd like you to take a look at these documents." I watched as the mayor looked over the papers, his face gradually changing from confusion to shock. This can't be right," he stammered. "But it is," Sarah said firmly, "verified and notarized by the state registry. The Sullivan Shipyard property has a legal and binding reversion clause. If it is used for anything other than shipbuilding, the property automatically reverts to the city, which means," I added, "that Harrington's grand design for that area would be legally compromised from the start." Mayor Thompson looked at us, then at the documents, then back at us. "Why are you showing me this? You could have simply waited for Harrington to buy the property and then trigger the clause." My father, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "Because we don't want a conflict, Mayor. We just want to continue our business in peace. This town has always been good to the Sullivans, and we want to be good to it." The mayor nodded slowly, assessing the situation. Finally, he sighed. "I'll talk to Harrington, but you know he won't be happy." "We don't expect him to stay," I replied. The final showdown took place the next day in a conference room at City Hall. Harrington arrived with 2 lawyers and a barely concealed expression of irritation. When he saw us, my father, Sarah, and the mayor, he frowned. "What's this, Thompson?" he asked the mayor. "I thought this meeting was about final approval of the project." "Circumstances have changed, Mac," the mayor said. Miss Martinez found some document. As Harrington examined the documents Sarah handed him, I saw his face go through a range of emotions: disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of grudging respect that can be challenged, one of his lawyers muttered. "It may," Sarah replied promptly. But as long as the litigation drags on for years, the clause will remain in effect, and no bank will finance a project with that kind of legal risk. Harrington looked at me, his cold eyes assessing the situation. You orchestrated this, didn't you? The prodigal daughter returning to save the old man. Actually, I replied calmly, you were the one who orchestrated all of this when you decided you could bully an honest man out of the business his family had built for generations. Harrington leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the table. Finally, he waved dismissively to his lawyers, who looked surprised but complied, leaving the room. The mayor, taking the hint, also stood. I'll let them sort it out, he said, quickly escaping. When it was just the four of us, me, my father, Sarah, and Harrington, a tense silence fell over the room. What do you want? Harrington finally asked. Sarah opened another folder. We have a proposal. Mr. Sullivan will retain ownership of the shipyard without interference. You will withdraw any claims or obstructions you have initiated. In exchange, Mr. Sullivan will be willing to sell a small portion of the property, the northern portion, which is not used for construction, for your development, provided it is compatible with the historic character of the area. What if I refuse? Then, I said, we will file a lawsuit for wrongful commercial interference with all the vendors and inspectors who have agreed to testify. While this progresses, we will ensure that the reversion clause is prominently recorded in all modern property records, effectively making that land unsaleable for its intended purpose. Harrington looked at me for a long time, then looked at my father. You've raised quite a daughter, James, he said finally. My father nodded. I didn't raise her like this. She's always been like this. Harrington turned his attention to me. You know, you could have a brilliant future in business when you tire of sailing the world. I'm very happy where I am, Mr. Harrington, protecting what matters. He considered for a moment longer, then nodded curtly. Fine, we'll do it your way. But I want that north parcel, and I want a right-of-way to the water. Sarah smiled. We've already included that in the proposal. 2 hours and many detailed negotiations later, we had a tentative agreement. Harrington left first, still not completely happy, but defeated in a way he was clearly not accustomed to. When he left, my father let out a long sigh. I can't believe we did it. Sarah began gathering her documents. We still have a lot of work ahead of us to formalize everything, but the worst is over. After Sarah left, I was left alone with my father in the conference room. He looked at me with teary eyes. Katie, he said. I never ... double quotes. I know, Dad, I interrupted, hugging him. I know. On my last day of leave, I spent the morning helping my father at the shipyard. Together, we worked on a small fishing boat that was under repair, our hands working in harmony as if I had never left. What do you think will happen now? I asked as I sanded a piece of wood. My father smiled, looking around the shipyard his family had. I think we'll keep building boats. And maybe, with Harrington's reluctant partnership, we can even modernize a bit, attract new customers. You know, he's still untrustworthy, right? I know, my father nodded. But now he knows we're not easy prey either. That makes all the difference in the business world. That afternoon, as I packed my bags to return to work, I found my father in the backyard, looking at our house, the lighthouse that so many generations of Sullivans had called home. It's beautiful, isn't it? He said, looking at the old Victorian structure. Your great-grandfather built this house to last. Yes, I agreed, stopping beside him. He built for the generations that would come after him. Just like you did this week, Katie, my father said, turning to me. You didn't just save the business. You saved our legacy. I hugged my father, breathing in the familiar scent of sawdust and salt water that I always associated with him, safety, and home. I have to go, I said finally, pulling away. I know, he replied. You have your own sea to sail now. As I drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw my father still standing there, with the house and the ocean in the background, two constants in a world of change. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel torn between my two worlds. Somehow, by fighting for the past, I had secured my future as well. The next day, back on the USS Halsey, I took my post on deck with a new sense of purpose. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, but now I knew with certainty that no matter how far I sailed, there would always be a safe harbor waiting for me. 6 months had passed since my battle with Maxwell Harrington III, and things at home had changed significantly. Through emails and occasional video calls, my father kept me updated on developments at Sullivan Shipyard. True to his word, who at least legally compelled, Harrington had stopped his pressure tactics. The agreement we formalized allowed him to purchase the small northern parcel of the property, where he began building a luxury marina on a much smaller scale than his original plans. Most surprisingly, after the dust settled, Harrington seemed to develop a grudging respect for Sullivan Shipyard. In a turn of events none of us could have anticipated, he began referring clients to my father, luxury yacht owners who needed artisanal repairs that modern shops couldn't adequately perform. It's weird, Katie, my dad told me on one of our calls. It's like, after we forced him to respect us, he actually started to appreciate what we do here. Maybe he just needs someone to stand up to him every now and then, I replied. The Sullivan Shipyard was thriving again, with new customers and no interference from Harrington. My father had hired 2 new employees and was even considering expanding into historic boat restoration, a lucrative niche he'd always wanted to explore. As for me, my tour on the USS Halsey was coming to an end, and I had received orders for a new assignment: instructor at the Naval Academy itself, where I would teach navigation and leadership to the next generation of officers. It was a significant honor for someone of my age and rank. When I told my father about my new position, he was overjoyed. Annapolis. This means you'll be closer to home, he said, unable to hide his joy. Just a few hours' drive, I confirmed. I might visit on the weekends occasionally. The prospect of being closer to home, of being able to personally check on the progress at the shipyard, made me happier than I expected. Perhaps what they say about sailors was true. No matter how far we sail, we always yearn for port. 2 weeks before reporting to Annapolis, I took a short leave of absence to visit home and help my father with some business transitions. When I arrived, I barely recognized the place. The shipyard had been renovated with a new workhouse and modern equipment that complemented, rather than replace, the traditional techniques that had always been the Sullivans' trademark. Wow, I said as my dad showed me the improvement. How did you afford all this? My father smiled mysteriously. I had a little help. Whose? Don't tell me it was Harrington. No, he laughed, although he did send some excellent clients. Actually, it was Sarah Martinez who helped organize everything, apparently, after our confrontation with Harrington. Sarah had become intrigued by the history of the Sullivan Shipyard. She researched and discovered that, as one of the oldest operating shipyards on the East Coast, we were eligible for several historic preservation and small business development grants. She worked on it for months, my father explained. He filled out all the forms, made all the connections. He said it was the least he could do after seeing how we almost lost everything. That evening, Sarah joined us for dinner at our house. As we talked about the developments of the past few months, I noticed how comfortable she and my father seemed with each other, exchanging glances and inside jokes that suggested a familiarity that hadn't existed when I left. You two have been spending a lot of time together, I observed casually as I helped serve dessert. My father blushed slightly, something I'd rarely seen him do. Sarah's been a great help with the business, he said. Your father is a remarkable man, Catherine, Sarah added. The more I work with him, the more impressed I am by his integrity and vision. Later, when Sarah had left and my dad and I were sitting on the porch, looking out at the ocean in the moonlight, I decided to tease him a little. So, you and Sarah, huh? He looked at me with a mixture of embarrassment and amusement. Is it that obvious? Dad, I'm a Navy navigation officer. I'm trained to observe. He laughed, shaking his head. Sarah is. She's special, Kate. Smart, strong, determined. Reminds me a lot of you, actually. And, ever since your mom passed away, I never thought I'd find someone who... double quotes. I know, Dad, I said softly, placing my hand over his. And I'm happy for you. Mom would be too. He squeezed my hand, and we were silent for a moment, letting the sound of the waves fill the space between us. What about you, Katie? He asked finally. Any special sailors on the horizon? It was my turn to blush. Actually, there is someone, an engineering officer I met during a joint mission. He'll be stationed in Maryland next year, not far from Annapolis. My father smiled. Looks like we're both sailing in interesting waters then. Over the next few days, I immersed myself back in the shipyard routine, helping my father with some projects and getting to know the new employees. One particularly pleasant afternoon, we were working together on a vintage wooden boat when we saw a sleek car pull up outside. Maxwell Harrington III stepped out, adjusting his expensive suit, and walked toward us. Instinctively, I tensed, but my father placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Sullivan," Harrington greeted my father with a wave. Then he turned to me. "Lieutenant, I hear you're back in town. Temporarily," I replied. "New assignment in Annapolis soon." "Good for you," he said, and it sounded almost sincere. Then, turning to my father, "James, that client from Boston I sent you, he won't stop talking about the work you did on his boat's wheel. Now I have another one who needs someone with your skills." As they discussed the details of the potential new client, I watched Harrington. He still had that air of superiority, still clearly a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. But there was something different, a touch of, not exactly humility, but perhaps respect. When the client's business was settled, Harrington looked around the renovated shipyard. "Impressive place you have here, Sullivan. Almost makes me regret not being able to buy it." He smiled, showing he was partially joking. "We're always open for business here," my father replied with a smile of his own. "Just not for sale." Harrington laughed and held out his hand, which my father shook firmly. As he turned to, he stopped and looked at me. "You know, Lieutenant, if you ever decide to leave the Navy, my development company could always use someone with your ... determination. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, but I'm very happy where I am." He nodded as if it were exactly what he'd expected. "Of course it is. The Sullivans have always been too stubborn for their own good." There was an almost admiring tone in his voice. "Have a good day, you two." After he left, I looked at my father with a raised eyebrow. That was ... surreal. My dad laughed. "The business world is strange, Katie. Sometimes your worst enemy today can be your reluctant partner tomorrow." "Do you trust him?" "Not at all," my father replied promptly. "But I respect his intelligence, and he respects our determination. Sometimes that's enough to get business done." The day before I left for Annapolis, I had a special dinner with my dad and Sarah at the waterfront restaurant that had been our family's favorite since I was a child. As we ate, we talked about the future mine in Annapolis. Theirs here in the city. "We're thinking about expanding the business, really embracing this historic preservation thing," my dad said, more excited than he'd been in years. "Sarah thinks we could even open a small school to teach traditional shipbuilding technique. It would be great for the city, for preserving skills, and frankly, great for business," Sarah added. "There's a growing market for authentic crafts." As I watched them, I saw something my father had long lacked. Not just happiness, but purpose. A path forward that excited him. "Sounds perfect," I said sincerely. Later, walking along the shore with my father after Sarah had left, I stopped to look at our house on the hilltop, the lighthouse we almost missed. "You know what's funny, Dad?" he said. "When I was at the academy and then on the ship, I always thought I was leaving home behind, moving on. But now I realize I carried this place with me the whole time." My father smiled, following my gaze to the house. "Your mother used to say something similar, that a true home isn't just a place, it's something you carry in your heart." She was. "Right," he said softly. "She usually was," he replied, that familiar mix of love and loss in his voice. The next day, when I left for Annapolis, I did something I'd never done before. Instead of looking straight ahead at the road ahead, I kept my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror until the house, the boatyard, and my waving father disappeared from view. It wasn't goodbye, it was a promise. A promise that no matter where life took me, I would always know my way back, that I would always fight for what mattered, and that the house we nearly lost would remain standing, a beacon for future generations of Sullivan, just as it had been for me. As I drove toward my new future, I carried with me the lessons of those 2 intense weeks, that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, that history and legacy matter, and that with the right people by your side, even the most intimidating opponents can be faced and defeated. And who knows? Maybe one day I'd return, not just to visit, but to stay, to take over the Sullivan shipyard, to carry on the tradition, to build boats with my own hands, just as generations of Sullivans had done before me. But for now, I had young officers to train, an ocean of knowledge to share, and my own path to follow. And thanks to what we had accomplished together, my father, Sarah, and I knew there would always be a safe harbor waiting for me when the tides turned again. As the sun rose on the horizon before me, I smiled. This wasn't just the story of how we saved the Sullivan shipyard. It was the story of how we rediscovered what it truly means to call a place home. Lieutenant Sullivan? The voice pulled me from my thoughts. I was standing on the balcony of the Naval Academy's main building, watching the cadets march across the courtyard. I turned and saw Commander Roberts approaching. "Sir," I replied, straightening up automatically. "Sorry to interrupt your contemplation," he said with a smile, "but I wanted to personally congratulate you on your first semester as an instructor. The cadet evaluation reports have arrived, and your numbers are exceptional." "Thank you, sir. It has been a rewarding experience." "It doesn't surprise me," he said. "Officers with real combat experience bring a perspective that can't be taught in books." We exchanged a few more words about the upcoming semester before he said goodbye. I was left alone again, gazing out at the campus where my own naval journey had begun years ago. It had been a year since the battle for Sullivan Shipyard, a year since I'd faced Heron and discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Life had moved on in ways I could barely have imagined. My father and Sarah had married in a small waterfront ceremony 3 months earlier. The Sullivan Shipyard now housed a traditional shipbuilding school that attracted students from all over the East Coast. And, to my continued surprise, my father and Harrington had developed a reluctant partnership of sorts, with the shipyard providing craftsmanship for the luxury clientele of Harrington's marina. As for me, I had found my own rhythm at Annapolis. Teaching was a different challenge than commanding a ship, but equally satisfying in its own way. Seeing the understanding dawn in the cadets' eyes as I shared lessons learned at sea was deeply rewarding. And then there was Michael, the engineering officer I'd mentioned to my father. Now stationed in Maryland, our relationship had blossomed in recent months, transforming into something I hadn't expected to encounter so early in my military career. As I watched the sun set over the Chesapeake Bay, I thought about how quickly life could change, how the battles we fight shape who we become, how the homes we defend define our sense of belonging. My phone buzzed with a text message from my dad. "Great news! The Maritime Historic Preservation Society has approved our designation request. The Sullivan Shipyard is now officially a National Historic Site." I smiled at the screen, feeling a surge of pride. What we had nearly lost had become something even greater, something that would be preserved for future generations. The house he had mocked, the business he had nearly taken, both were now safer than ever. I typed a quick reply. "Congratulations, Dad. No one deserves it more. See you this weekend." As I put away my phone, I noticed a group of first-year cadets looking at me curiously. One of them, a young woman with the same determined look I had, at that age, finally summoned the courage to approach. "Excuse me, Lieutenant Sullivan. Is it true that before you came here, you faced off against a real estate mogul who was trying to take over your family business?" I laughed, surprised. "Where did you hear that, cadet?" "It's circulating among the students," she said, looking a little embarrassed. "They say you use strategy and legal knowledge to defeat someone with far more resources." I looked at her and her peers, young people eager to prove themselves just as I had been. "The story is a little more complicated than that," I replied, "and it involved many people besides me. But yes, I've learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight for who and what we love." His eyes gleamed with something I recognized, that mix of ambition and idealism that had brought me to Annapolis years ago. "Perhaps one day I can hear the full story, Lieutenant." "Maybe," I smiled, "but you should all be at dinner now, shouldn't you?" They quickly agreed and walked away, still casting curious glances in my direction. I turned to look once more at the bay, the waters that connected this place to the open ocean, and, eventually, the small coastal town I still called home. The battle for Sullivan Shipyard was over, but its lessons remained with me. In that moment, I realized something my father had probably known all along. No matter how far we sailed, No matter what seas we crossed, there would always be a lighthouse guiding us home. And sometimes, defending that lighthouse was the most important mission of all. With that certainty in my heart, I turned and walked back to the academy halls, ready to mold the next generation of officers who, like me, would learn that true strength comes not just from the uniform we wear, but from the values we uphold and the homes we protect. And somewhere along the coast, the Sullivan Shipyard continued its centuries-old work, its lights shining like a little beacon of its own, a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, and that some stories, like ours, continue long after the battle is over. This was the true lesson I hope the cadets under my command would one day understand. That we serve not just a country or a nation, but an ideal of home that goes beyond walls and rooftops, an ideal that lives in our hearts and defines who we are, no matter where duty takes us. And that, more than any victory against Harrington, or any promotion I might receive, was the true Sullivan legacy of family that built boats, defended its home, and discovered that sometimes the winds that try to knock us down are the same ones that strengthen our roots. As my mother used to say, a true home isn't just a place, it's something you carry in your heart. And after everything we'd been through, I finally fully understood what she meant. 2 years had passed since I became an instructor at Annapolis. The rhythm of the seasons had brought changes for us all. As autumn turned the campus leaves into shades of red and gold, I received news that would once again change the course of my life: a promotion to lieutenant commander and a new assignment as executive officer on the USS Mason. It was an extraordinary opportunity for someone my age, a significant step in my career that would put me on the path to eventually captaining my own ship. But it also meant leaving Annapolis, leaving the proximity of home, and Michael. The night after I received the news, I walked to the pier near my small apartment in Annapolis. The moonlight reflected off the bay, creating a silvery road that seemed to stretch into infinity. It was there that Michael found me, as he had so many times before when we needed to think. "I thought I'd find you," he said softly, joining me at the water's edge. "News travels fast," I commented. "The Navy isn't exactly known for its discretion," he replied with a slight smile. "Congratulations, Catherine. USS Mason, it's a fantastic ship." I nodded, still absorbing the reality of what was to come. "It's a great opportunity. The best," he agreed, his voice mixing pride and something else, a note of resignation that didn't go unnoticed. We were silent for a moment, the soft sound of water lapping against the pier pilings filling the space between us. "Michael, no," he interrupted me gently. "You don't have to say anything. We both knew this would happen. It's the life we chose." I looked at him, this man who had become so important in my life over the past 2 years. A brilliant engineering officer with kind eyes and capable hands who could fix anything, except perhaps the distance that would now open between us. "So what happens now?" I asked finally. He turned fully to me, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "That's up to us, isn't it? We can do what most military couples do, try to make it work from a distance, see each other when our leaves overlap. Or, I prompted when he paused, "or we can recognize that we are both dedicated to our careers, admit that the timing is not on our side, and go our separate ways." I felt a tightness in my chest. "Is this what you want? What I want," he said with a softness that nearly broke my composure, "is to be the man who waits for you at home after every sailing. I want to build a life with you, Catherine, but I also know how much you love what you do, how much you've accomplished. I wouldn't ask you to give that up, just as I know you wouldn't ask the same of me." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "It wouldn't be fair to either of us." "No," he agreed. "It wouldn't be." That night, we made a decision neither of us wanted, but one we both knew was necessary. There were no villains in this story, just the realities of the life we had chosen. 2 weeks later, as I prepared to depart for San Diego, where the USS Mason was docked, I made one last trip home. I needed to see my father, Sarah, and the shipyard before embarking on my new journey. I arrived on a sunny October afternoon. The city seemed especially vibrant, with autumn colors framing the historic houses and harbor. I drove slowly down the main, noticing the small changes that had occurred since my last visit: a new coffee shop on the corner, the freshly painted town hall, the statue of the city's founder finally restored. When I arrived at Sullivan Shipyard, I was amazed at what I saw. The place was bustling like never before, with at least a dozen people working on various projects. Some were clearly apprentices from the traditional shipbuilding school, guided by more experienced craftsmen. My father saw me before I could get out of the car. He dropped the tool he was using and came toward me, his face breaking into a radiant smile. "Katie," he exclaimed, hugging me tightly, "why didn't you tell me you were coming today?" "I wanted to surprise you," I replied, returning the hug. "And it looks like I'm the one being surprised. This place is unrecognizable." He stood back, looking proudly at the shipyard. "We've been working hard. The National Historic Site designation really put the shipyard on the map. We have more orders than we can handle, and the school is thriving. We have a 6-month waiting list now." "That's amazing." "Dad, come," he said, pulling me by the arm like he used to do when I was a child. "I want to show you everything." For the next hour, my father led me through the transformed shipyard, introducing me to new employees and apprentices, and showing me the projects in progress. There was an infectious energy about the place, a blend of tradition and innovation that seemed to have breathed new life into the centuries-old business. "And this," he said as we reached a particularly impressive wooden boat, "is our most important project currently. An exact replica of a 19th century whaler for the Boston Maritime Museum." I ran my hand over the polished wood, admiring the meticulous workmanship. "It's beautiful, Father Sullivan," a familiar voice called. We turned to see Maxwell Harrington III approaching, dressed surprisingly casually by his standards, though still impeccably groomed. "Harrington," my father replied cordially. "Come to check on the wire's progress?" Of course. The museum is excited, you know. And look who's here, Lieutenant Sullivan." He offered me his hand, which I shook firmly. "Or should I say, Lieutenant Commander, congratulations on the promotion." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely surprised that he knew. "How did you know?" He smiled, that foxy smile that never seemed entirely sincere. "I have my contacts in Washington. Besides, the little shipyard I nearly destroyed produced a Navy executive officer. That's the kind of story that gets attention." There was an almost respectful tone in his voice that still caught me off guard, even after 2 years of his strange partnership with my father. "Is the whaler your project?" I asked, indicating the boat behind us. "Let's just say I helped facilitate the connection between the Sullivan Shipyard and the museum," Harrington replied. "I was on their board of directors for years. When they mentioned they wanted an authentic replica built using traditional methods, I knew exactly who to recommend." My father chuckled softly. "I never thought I'd say this, but Harrington has become our biggest advocate in elite East Coast circles. I just know excellence when I see it," Harrington said with a shrug. "And speaking of excellence, your wife is looking for you, James. Something about the new state grant applications." "Oh yeah, I'll be there in a minute," my dad replied. He turned to me. "Want to come, Katie?" "I'll be there in a moment," I replied. I want to admire the whaler a little longer. When my father moved away, I was left alone with Harrington, a situation that would have been unthinkable a few years earlier. "So," he said, studying the boat beside us, "heading back to sea." "I see, yes, USS Mason. We leave for the Western Pacific in 3 weeks. "Impressive," he commented. "You know, Catherine, I've never had the opportunity to say this properly, but I learned a lot from our little ... conference." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Don't look so surprised. Even old dogs can learn new tricks, as they say." He glanced around the shipyard, at the hustle and bustle of craftsmen and apprentices. "This place, I saw it only as valuable land, an obstacle to my plans. I didn't see it for what it truly was, a living piece of history, a repository of knowledge that was about to be lost." "That's a surprisingly philosophical outlook for a businessman," I observed. He laughed. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just getting older and starting to think about the kind of legacy I want to leave." Harrington paused, looking at the luxury marina he had built on the northern portion of the property. "The marina is doing well, but it's just another money-making venture. This," he gestured to the boatyard, This will last long after I'm gone. I sat in silence, processing this unexpected version of Maxwell Harrington III. Anyway, he continued, returning to his more businesslike tone, your war with me ended up bringing a peace that benefited everyone, didn't it? Your family kept the shipyard, I got my marina, and the city gained a historical treasure and an economic engine. Who would have thought? Certainly not me, I replied honestly. He nodded, then glanced at his watch. I have to go. I have a meeting with the zoning committee. Tell your father I'll be back tomorrow to discuss the details of the museum event invitation. As he walked away, I called out, Harrington? He turned around. Why did you do this? Why did you become a defender of the courtyard after you put so much effort into destroying it? He considered the question for a moment. Let's just say that sometimes, when you can't win, you realize you didn't even really want what you were trying to achieve. With a final nod, he continued on his way. Later that evening, I sat on the porch with my dad and Sarah, sharing a bottle of wine as the sun set over the water. I never imagined Harrington would practically become a member of the family, I commented. Sarah laughed. Family member is an exaggeration. Let's just say he's like that distant uncle no one really likes, but everyone respects for some reason. My father smiled, putting an arm around Sarah's shoulders. Life is strange, Katie, full of unexpected twists and turns. Speaking of twists, Sarah said, exchanging a look with my father, we have news. My heart raced. What news? My father took a deep breath, a smile spreading across his face. The shipbuilding school is going to expand. We've secured funding to build a new educational facility and a small museum. That's wonderful, I exclaimed. There's more, Sarah added, her hand finding my father's. We're having a baby. The news hit me like a wave, unexpected and powerful. A baby? I'm going to have a brother or sister? My father laughed at my stunned expression. Half brother or half sister, technically, but yes. That's ... Wow. I stood up and hugged them both, tears of surprised happiness filling my eyes. I'm so happy for you guys. We know it's a surprise, Sarah said softly. Neither did we expect it at our age. But it happened, and we're so happy. When? March, my father replied. The doctor says everything is going well so far. As we sat back down, a new reality began to form in my father, at 58, was going to be a father again. Our family was expanding, and I would be thousands of miles away, sailing the Pacific, when this new chapter began. I'm sorry I won't be, he said finally. Hey, my dad said, his voice firm. Without that, you'll be doing exactly what you're supposed to do. We're proud of you. Besides, he smiled, this little one's going to need a big sister to look up to. Later in my old room, I lay staring at the ceiling, where the star stickers my father had put up when I was 8 still glowed faintly. Life went on at home while I went my own way. There was a sweetness to it, but also a hint of melancholy. I got up and went to the window, looking out at the familiar view of the harbor and, beyond it, the endless ocean. The same ocean that would soon carry me away again. The next morning, my father suggested we walk to the Royal Lighthouse at the north, and of town a tradition of ours whenever I returned home or left again. As we climbed the familiar path, we chatted about everything and nothing. His plans for the new baby, my next assignment, the little town gossip. When we reached the top, we stopped to admire the panoramic view, the ocean stretching to the horizon in one direction, our little town nestled on the coast in the other. Remember when I first brought you here? My father asked. I was 6, I replied, smiling at the memory. You lifted me up so I could see over the stone wall. You pointed to the ocean and asked what was on the other side, he continued. And I said, adventures, Katie, and someday, if you want, you can go and discover them. I finished the sentence with him. My father nodded, his eyes watering a little. I always knew you would. Even when we fought for that damned shipyard, even when I thought we might lose everything, a part of me knew you belonged out there. He gestured toward the ocean. You have the soul of an explorer like your great-grandfather, and the stubborn heart of a Sullivan. He laughed. That too. We were silent for a moment, the salty wind blowing in our faces. Dad, he said finally, what if I'm not making the right choice? Michael and we're done. My father looked at me sympathetically. Because of your new assignment? Absent, he said softly. There are no perfect choices in life, just different paths. Michael is a good man. If you're meant to be together, you'll find a way. If you're not, well, life has a strange way of taking us where we need to be, even if it's not where we thought we wanted to go. How are you and Harrington practically becoming friends? I teased, trying to lighten the moment. Exactly, he laughed. Who could have predicted this? Or Sarah and I having a baby at this age? Life isn't a straight line. It's more like sailing. You adjust your sails as the wind changes. I looked back at the ocean, thinking of all the places it would take me, all the things I would still see. I guess you're right. Of course I am, he said with feigned confidence. I'm your father. 3 days later, it was time to leave. My car was loaded for the long drive to San Diego, and I stood in the driveway of our house, the lighthouse we almost missed saying goodbye. Keep us posted, Sarah said, hugging me tightly, and we'll be live streaming when this little one arrives. So try to be near a computer in March. I'll do my best, I promised, placing a gentle hand on her still flat belly. Take care of yourself. And take care of him too, I added, looking at my father. Always, she replied with a smile. My father was the last to say goodbye, as always. His embrace was strong and familiar, smelling of sawdust and aftershave. I'm proud of you, Katie, he said, the same words he'd said at every goodbye since I'd entered the Naval Academy. Never forget that. I won't forget, I replied. The same words I always said in return. As I walked away to get in the car, he added, and Katie, remember, this house, this beacon will always be here, guiding you home no matter where you are. I nodded, no confidence in my voice at that moment. As I drove along the coastal road, I watched in the rearview mirror as my father's solitary figure, hand in hand with Sarah, grew smaller and smaller. Beside me in the passenger seat sat a small model boat my father had given me that morning, a perfect replica of the USS Mason, crafted with the same care and skill he dedicated to every vessel he built. So you have a piece of home with you, he had said. And as I headed toward my future, I took with me more than just that small model. I took the lessons from home about fighting for what matters, about adapting to change, about finding strength in deep roots, lessons that would serve me well on the deck of the USS Mason and beyond. The ocean called to me, as it always had, but now I knew, with unshakable certainty, that no matter how far I sailed, there would always be a beacon guiding me back to the Sullivan shipyard, to the pale blue clapboard house at the top of the hill, and to the people who made it all possible. It was more than I could have ever asked for. It was everything I needed